Hi everyone. I'm really excited to bring this project to you today. This is something that I've wanted to start for a while now, and I'm finally just getting around to it. So the plan is to have an interview series where I talk to musicians that I really admire and who have helped me in my own journey, and I think could help others as well. And I'm so fortunate that the first guest is Jack Brndiar. I met Jack Brndiar when I started my undergrad at Baldwin Wallace Conservatory. He was a great mentor to me during my time there, and he's still a great mentor to me ever since I've been back in Cleveland. And I'm fortunate to call him a friend and colleague. I think his well-versed career is worth talking about, and so I wanted to have him on. So to start, I'm going to read through his bio, and then we'll fade this video into the interview tomorrow. Enjoy. Jack Brndiar is principal trumpet of the Cleveland Chamber Symphony, a Grammy Award-winning ensemble. He has appeared as soloist and is featured on many of their recordings, including the Shostakovich Concerto for Piano, Trumpet, and Strings. Jack has performed, recorded, and toured with the Cleveland Orchestra for 34 seasons as an extra and substitute trumpeter, and is a member of the Paragon Brass Quintet, the Kent Brass Quintet, the Blossom Festival Orchestra and Band, and the Festival Mosaic Orchestra in California. As a freelance musician, Jack has performed at the Metropolitan Opera, the Cleveland Symphonic Winds, the Ohio Chamber Orchestra, the Cleveland Opera and Ballet Orchestras, the Blue Water Chamber Orchestra, the Erie Philharmonic, and the Akron, Canton, and Ashland Symphonies. With the Paragon Brass Quintet, he has performed at the International Trumpet Guild Conference and toured to Europe and China presenting concerts and masterclasses, and he was a founding member of the Metropolitan Brass Quintet. Solo performances have included recitals at Baldwin Wallace, concerts with the Freedom Brass Band, the Strongsville Band, the Civic Concert Band of Lorraine, the Euclid Orchestra, the Parma Symphony, and as soloist and conductor of the Lakewood Hometown Band. Jack has recorded several solo CDs for the Ludwig Master Series for young students, and has been a featured soloist in the orchestra and on band recordings produced by Ludwig. He has played in Broadway touring company productions and has recorded numerous radio and TV commercials and pop music hits, including Play That Funky Music by Wild Cherry. In the jazz field, he has performed with the Cleveland Jazz Orchestra, the Jazz Unit, and the Hot Jazz 7. Jack was a former faculty member at Baldwin Wallace Conservatory, Cleveland Institute of Music, and Case Western Reserve University. Well, Jack, it's great to see you.
Great
Thanks
to see
for
you
being
too.
here.
Oh, sure.
Really appreciate your time.
Yeah.
So let's talk about like your early days. Who did you study with?
I think my first teacher's name was Wesley Wittick, and I found out later that he was a BW graduate. My elementary band director was a BW graduate as well, and so I suppose that's how the connection worked. And I don't remember a whole lot about the early lessons. They weren't all that challenging, I think. I seem to remember that. Things were pretty easy for me. When I look back, I can say I wish I would have been even more challenged. But
Right.
At the time, I did my lesson work, and anyway, it didn't seem all that challenging. And after I think a couple of years, then I quit the lessons. I remember my mother telling me she got a phone call from the teacher saying he's not practicing a lot. Maybe you should continue. And I think I just was enjoying playing trumpet. And actually, I was playing cornet at that time.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, started on cornet, and I just enjoyed sort of playing music that I would hear on radio and TV, on records, and so I think I was developing my ear a little bit at that young age, and just enjoying playing by ear. And then when I started lessons again a couple of years later, then of course I learned a little bit more about reading rhythms and so forth. So, and then in high school I did we had concert band. We didn't have orchestra in our high school. There was no string program. I started studying again in about the 10th grade. So there was a gap of a couple of years there where I didn't have formal lessons. And that teacher, his name was Darrell Lund. I don't know where he is or where he was from or what his background was. But with him, I started in the Clark's book and also the Arbans. I may have had the Arbans before that. I may have bought that on my own. But I do remember getting the Clark book with him. And then in my junior year of high school, I studied with another teacher who was a band director at another school in our area. And he really helped me a lot. And he had me get the Charlier book. So it was good to start that, at a fairly young age. And I worked with him, I think, for just about a year, right? And then one of the other players in my band in high school was taking lessons with Charlie Schluter through CIM prep department. And, he told me about it, and he said, this is a Cleveland Orchestra trumpet player, and he's taking lessons with him. So I thought, well, maybe I should take lessons with him too. So, because the competition is starting to, study with, bigger name
Right.
player. So I started lessons with Schluter as well. That was my senior year of high school, and I learned a lot from him. And so he was the first real professional player that I had studied with. And he got me into top tones and worked a lot more with the Charlier. And so a lot of the more advanced literature I did with Schluter. And he had me do his breathing technique, which you probably know about.
Yeah.
Inhaling as much air as you possibly can before you play every time. And I'm not sure I still do exactly the same thing these days, but I did work with that for quite a bit.
Mm.
And he told me one time that I should audition for Juilliard, because I was a senior in high school. And I thought, really? And I'm not sure I wanted to move and live in New York City anyway. And I think I didn't have the confidence in myself to actually take the step to do that.
Mm.
But anyway, so I didn't. And but then I went to Ohio State for my freshman year of college. I'd done the solo and ensemble contest my senior year, and I think everyone who got a 1 rating received a letter from OSU, congratulating them, and why don't you come and audition for it? So I auditioned for them and spent my freshman year at OSU, but I wasn't real happy there. Although I had 2 good teachers there, Tom Battenberg and Richard Burkhart, and but I had heard a lot about Jim Darling at BW, and I think I'd heard that BW was a good place to go to, but it was a private school as opposed to OSU, which is state school. So the cost was about double. But middle of my freshman year at OSU, I decided I'm going to audition for BW anyway and see what happens. And I ended up getting a grant that covered about half of the cost. So now my costs were equal. So I transferred, and I transferred back and to Cleveland area, and I had some jobs that I had been playing. I was playing in a rock band, and I was able to get back in that group, and some other work, church jobs and a lot of other things. So the beginnings of the freelancing career, I think, was starting at that point. And so, and being a BW was really a good choice for me.
So what was it like, studying with Jim Darling and Mary Squire?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, it was, great experience. Jim is just a wonderful person, a wonderful personality. Everyone loved him. I mean, at school, the faculty, the other students, even the non-trumpet students, other players in the orchestra. He's just a really great person. And so that in itself is a good way to go when you're studying with someone. And he, seemed to know what to do for each individual student to get them to, do the work they needed to do. But, he was a great player, and he had me continue with some of the lesson material I had been using, but then he also got me in other advanced things. He started me with orchestral excerpts, and so I learned a lot from him. I think one lesson that stands out is when I don't think I was prepared, and at the time I was a music education major, and actually I ended up getting the BME degree, but I had kind of thought, well, maybe I can play professionally, but I didn't quite have the confidence that I could do it. And I think he knew that, although he thought, he could, he thought maybe I could make it if I worked hard enough. And so at any rate, one lesson, I think I was playing something and, kept missing it, and it was obvious I hadn't prepared. And he said something like, well, it's all right, you're only going to be a band director anyway. And so that really hit me and made me think, and I still remember that to this day. And so at that point, I think I started working a little harder, doing a little more concentrated work to improve my playing, and then I think my playing did improve from that point. Mm. But that was an important lesson. So he knew what to do to get you to really realize what you're capable of. Maybe that's a good way to put it. And also he, like I was saying, he's really so popular. Students would line up at the studio door waiting for it to open at the end of one lesson, and before the next student would come in, 3 or 4 other students would be standing around, Mr. Darling, Mr. Darling, you know, asking him a question about a mouthpiece or about an etude or whatever, about trumpet. So it was so funny. He would sometimes open the door and just go like this and try to pull the new student in after the other student went out, and not get inundated by all these other. And, you know, he would take the time though to talk to them. But I do remember that as well. I mean, this is a long time ago, but he would almost have to fight off the crowd of students that would wanting to get a piece of him for just a little bit more
Right.
time than they were getting in their lesson. You know, they get an hour lesson or whatever, and but they needed more time with him.
Now, do you remember who was in the trumpet studio at the time?
Oh yeah, so Tom Booth was there. He was a year older than me, and he was the first year player. And yeah, I was lucky enough to play next to him several concerts that first year. And I remember him. We did a wind ensemble piece, and it was the Royal Fireworks music, and he used pick for the cadenza, and well, probably used it for the whole first part. But I remember being really impressed with his playing there, and I didn't know too much about piccolo trumpet at that point, so that was eye-opening for me too. And yeah, I learned a lot from Tom throughout the next 3 years, and let's see. So I think the following year, then my junior year, Kevin Good came to BW, transferring from University of Michigan, and then that year Chuck Bergens came back to school. He had started, I think, the same year as Tom started. They were both freshmen together, and so my junior year, Chuck and Kevin and Tom were there together, and I think that year Dave Durrell came in maybe as a freshman, and maybe Bob Early as well, or it may have been the next year. I think it was maybe my junior year. Bob Early came in as a freshman. So anyway, for those last couple of years at BW for me, we had 5 of us. I guess, is that 5? 5 or 6 of us. There were a couple others too, good players, but players who went on to have really good professional careers, and we were all studying with Darling at the same time. So of course we'd get together and play duets and excerpts together, and learned a lot from each other. And I think that was another real plus about being at BW. And then also having Mary Squire to study with as well. During those years, BW was on the quarter system. So you have 10 weeks, 10 weeks, and 10 weeks for your school year. So each of us would study probably 2 quarters with Darling, and then 1 quarter with Mary. So it was split up that way. And Mary was great too. I mean, she's a beautiful player and a beautiful person as well. And, really beautiful lyrical sound when she played. And I always tried to emulate that in my playing. And then I was lucky to play with her professionally for about 20 years after that with Cleveland Ballet and Cleveland Opera. We played together in the Howard Chamber Orchestra. And so that was a great experience too. So I continued to learn from Mary as time went on.
Yeah.
So that was
absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I've heard she was like a really fabulous piccolo player. I
Yeah.
think there's an article out there about one of the Bach festivals.
Yeah, she always played principal at the Bach festivals. I think Darling played principal before he got in the Cleveland Orchestra. Yeah, I think he got in Cleveland Orchestra the fall of '73, so that would have been beginning of my junior year. And that may have been the point where Jim and Mary were splitting up the teaching. I think maybe the first year I was there, it may have just been Jim for the whole year. And then after he got in the orchestra, he had to cut back on his teaching a little bit. But yeah, he played principal in the Bach festival, so the B minor mass and the Christmas oratorio. Because Jim, I think, started at BW in '69. So they may have done both of those oratorios. They would rotate the 4 oratorios every year. And but then after Jim got in the orchestra, then I think Mary started playing principal in the Bach festivals. And yeah, she was just, stellar for, all that piccolo playing. And yeah, she'd get great reviews and huge applause when she'd stand up after the conductor would have her stand after the performances. But she, really played that so well.
Do you know when Mary started teaching at BW?
I think she was teaching at BW even before Jim got there, because her husband, Alan Squire, was the clarinet teacher, clarinet prof at BW for a long time. So I think they moved to Berea together probably. And so she may have been teaching earlier in the 60s.
Mm.
I'm not sure how much more before that.
I think when you and I have talked about your time at BW, it's just such an unbelievable trumpet studio at that time. I mean, all the players coming out of the BW studio at that time went on to have great careers. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, whether it be in freelance or in jumping from orchestra to orchestra, doing completely different things outside of the orchestra. I feel like everyone, you know, what was in the water at BW at that time?
Well, I think it was Darling. He just attracted good students. I don't know how much recruiting he did, or if he did much at all. His reputation somehow, came with him, and I'm not really sure how that all turned out that way, but yeah, really, we were all lucky that we were there together at the same time, and we all got along really well and learned from each other, and I think that's, and I'm sure that happens at other conservatories too, and other music schools, but yeah, you're lucky when you're in a situation like that, because it's not always like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, and you'd mentioned too that Jim won the job with Cleveland while you were there, right?
Right. Yep.
That's pretty amazing.
Yeah, that was, and I remember just before his audition, I remember he had a lesson with Tom, and they played Tom Booth, and Tom said they just kept playing duets over and over, and Jim just kept saying, "Let's play another duet. Let's play another one." Jim trying to build up his chops. I don't know if it was the same week of the audition or a week before the audition or something. And another thing about Tom that I recall, it was either Tom's junior or senior year, but Jim told him to, lock his B flat trumpet in the case and play C trumpet exclusively for the whole year, and all the ensembles, whatever, practicing whatever he did. So that was his way to, get Tom to really learn to play C trumpet.
Mm-hmm. So then you graduate from BW, and then you go to CIM.
Right, but I took what we call a gap year now, but we didn't call it that then. I took a year off of school because I still wasn't 100% sure where I wanted to go or what I wanted to do. But I was, when I graduated from BW, I was starting to do a lot of freelancing more and more. And I started playing with the Metropolitan Brass Quintet. And I also had a lot of other gigs. And then, I was also in the Ohio Chamber Orchestra at that point too. I started that the year before, I think. And the spring semester, though, last couple of months of my senior year was when I auditioned and got the Metropolitan Quintet. So I had those gigs ahead of me coming up. Oh, and also I was playing extra with Cleveland Orchestra. I mean, that's a good reason to want to stay around. But I wasn't sure. I thought maybe going to CIM would be good, but I also thought, well, maybe I could go to New York or to Boston or to some other, Chicago or someplace like that. So the following year, the fall of '76, I decided to start at CIM. I mean, I auditioned in the spring, I guess, and got in. So then, it was a year and a half for my master's, studying with Adelstein there.
What was that like, studying with Bernie?
It was great too. I mean, such an amazing orchestral player, and he was very different personality than Darling. A very, also a great person, but his teaching style was different. But Bernie also knew what to say to get you to, work. And and he played in the lessons occasionally, which was good too, sitting next to him, getting to play and listening to him play. And I also just learned a lot from, sitting in the balcony of Severance Hall and listening to the orchestra in rehearsals and concerts. He was just a real, model orchestral player to really learn from. When I started at CIM, the first concert of the season for Cleveland Orchestra was Bartok Concerto on the first half and Heldenleben on the second half. And CIM students were able to go to the dress rehearsals to listen. So a bunch of us went to the Thursday morning rehearsal, and we got to sit in the main floor and listen. I think it was May 4. Anyway, and the thought went through my mind that, well, brass players are going to probably take it easy because they have the concert that evening. Well, that wasn't the case, and this was a good lesson for me to learn they just played full steam for both pieces all the way through. And I thought, wow, how are they going to survive the concert tonight? So I went to the concert that night, and they sounded even stronger than they had in the morning rehearsal. And so I kind of learned a lesson from that. You don't necessarily need to save your chops any particular day. In fact, sometimes it's better. And we talked about this too. Play full strength, get a chunk of time off, and then later when you play again, I don't know if you get a second wind or if you're more prepared, you're really totally warmed up, and you play just as well or better. And then of course I also learned that as a professional, you can't not play the notes, or you can't take it easy, so to speak, in a rehearsal. You just have to play. You have to make this music sound the way it's going to sound, even though the concert is the same day.
Sure.
Yeah, of course. And that was a lesson for me to learn, because I think when I was younger, I had teachers telling me, save your chops and all this, and you really, unless you're really overdoing it, that's probably not a good strategy.
Yeah.
Because then you never really learn to develop.
Yeah, and I know you've mentioned this before, and I can remember a lesson with Ray Mace that I had, and in both cases, both of you are on the same page about that, where sometimes saving your chops can almost be worse than just playing out as you need to, not overdoing it, not expending what you don't need to, but to an extent, sort of getting a feel for what that's going to be like, and being prepared to play it twice.
Yeah, and when I was younger, I can remember practicing on any given day, and when I'd get tired, I would stop and I'd say to myself, well, okay, I'm done for the day, and I'll start again the next day. If I would have known that what I know now, like they always say, I would have practiced the second time after some couple hours break. But you have to find what works for you, and then stick with it. And sometimes some people find that out earlier than others, but you just don't give up, and you just keep working until you find that out. You find out what works best for you in terms of how much playing you should do, in terms of practicing, how much rest you should have, and getting just the right balance, because too much playing is not good, and too much rest is not good either.
I wanted to talk a little bit about something that gets mentioned a lot, which you played on Play That Funky Music by Wild Cherry.
Yeah.
So do you remember that recording session day?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, that was in the summer just before I started at CIM, and got a phone call from Chuck Bergens, and he and I had done a few recording sessions together. And of course, we played together as students a lot, but he had gotten a call from someone who was working on this project for this group. And basically, he just asked me if I was free on it was a Wednesday or something like that. I think I have it written down on my calendar book. I save my calendar books. So I could find that, but just asked me if I was free for a session. He said, it's $50, which is a going rate for a recording session in those days. And so, of course, I said, sure, I could do it. They had wanted 2 trumpets and an alto sax and a bari sax. So, and it was done in downtown Cleveland, a place called Cleveland Recording. The group had already recorded the tune. So everything was, we put on headphones, or maybe they played over speakers. So we listened to the tune. But there was no music for us. They had nothing written out for us to play. So we didn't know what we were supposed to be doing. And the guitar player, who was also the singer, and I think he was the leader of the group, was there. And I just remember he had his guitar over his shoulder. And so we asked him what he wanted us to play. And he said, we want some brass punches. Just want some brass punches. And so we thought, well, what does that mean? So we didn't lose too much more time. I think, we just came up with the idea of just sort of doubling what the guitar was doing with this chromatic 3-note, three-chord chromatic movement. So we just voiced out that chord between the 4 of us and started playing along with the track, and they liked it. And they added a couple other blurps here and there. And we also did a couple of other tunes on the album. They used some of that same phrase that you'll hear and Play the Funky Music on some of the other tunes, but also there were a few sustained and some other playing on the other tunes. And that was it. And it maybe took an hour, maybe a little longer. We had no idea it was going to be a big hit or not. And I guess they were promoting it pretty well, because it then ended up being a hit. But they did say, if it becomes a hit, we're going to give you some kind of bonus. Didn't say what. but they gave us I remember a yellow legal pad and asked us to write our names down there. So I was careful to spell my name with big, clear block letters because my last name is an unusual spelling. But then when the album came out, of course, someone decided, oh, I should insert a vowel there. But that's okay. So the bonus that they offered was for us to go on tour with them because it was a big hit, so they were going to do a tour across the country, I guess. But I was starting at CIM that fall, so I said no. And Chuck was starting at Boston University that fall, starting his master's degree. So, he said no too. We also did Mahler 8 and Verdi Requiem, Cleveland Orchestra, and I did play the funky music. Kind of interesting combination of things in one summer.
When did you start playing with the Cleveland Orchestra?
The first time I played was the summer of '74, so it was the year, summer before my senior year. And I had actually played in the summer of '73 with the Blossom Band. And Dave Zauder, who's the second trumpet in the Cleveland Orchestra those years, was also a personnel manager. And Darling brought him into BW to do a master class. And so that must have been '72 or early '73, because I remember playing for him, and I think Tom and Chuck and Kevin also probably played for him. This is one of the things that reasons why I have to thank Jim Darling so much for bringing Dave in, because that resulted in my getting hired to play the band, and then also the following summer with the orchestra. But for other reasons too. I mean, there were so many other things that Jim recommended me for, and to get my freelancing career, kicked off. So I played that '73 summer with the band, and I'm still playing this coming summer, which is 2025. So It's been a number of years. So I started with Cleveland in the summer of '74, and that was the Pines of Rome, and that's a memorable concert.
Oh, absolutely.
Obviously, first time playing with Cleveland Orchestra, and I remember they had the offstage brass sitting behind the violin section. There's a side of Blossom, when you're looking at the stage, there's a sort of an area where it slopes off of the stage, and so we were sitting there, and I just remember listening to the violin section during the movement where the clarinet solos, the soft movement. Just thinking it's just the most gorgeous sound I'd ever heard from strings, and it was a real moment. I can still hear that sound because we were literally sitting right behind the last row of the violins.
So you start playing with the Cleveland Orchestra, and then you are playing with the Ohio Chamber Orchestra, and the Ballet. How did this all sort of come about?
Yeah, well, the Ohio Chamber Orchestra started out as a faculty student ensemble at BW. And I think it was probably an outgrowth of the Bach Festival, because in the Bach Festival, the students, you even know because you played, faculty were used, in the first chair positions, and as many as they could, and then students would fill out the rest of the orchestra. So I think at some point, Jim Darling and the oboe professor, who was Galen Krall, and Dwight Oltman, who was the music director of OCO. And so I think the three of them sort of got together and figured out starting this chamber orchestra. And so it was an outgrowth of maybe some of what was happening with the Bach Festival Orchestra. So when the Ohio Chamber Orchestra first started, Darling was principal trumpet, and then Tom Booth was second trumpet, being the top student player at that time. And then Tom left after Tom graduated. Then they held auditions for the second chair. So I auditioned and got that chair. That was just after Jim Darling got in the Cleveland Orchestra, so that Mary Squire started playing principal in Jim's chair, in place of Jim. So that's when I started playing with Mary. And the Ohio Chamber Orchestra did, mostly the chamber concerts, no ballet or opera yet. I think 2 years later, I think '76 was when the opera company started, or at least they started using orchestra. So they hired OCO to play. And then I think the following year, '77 or '78, I think it was '77, the ballet company had been formed and employed the same orchestra. So at that point, by 1977 or '78, the OCO was playing its own series of concerts, chamber concerts, and both ballet and opera. So with the three different legs together, it wasn't quite a full-time job, but it was a little more substantial amount of work for a lot of us in the area, which was really nice. So I had that going and the Metronome Quintet. And then I was still doing some rock band playing and recording sessions. And then, of course, church jobs and playing extra with Cleveland and going to school. And I was teaching a lot of private students at the time, too. Yeah, at one point I had about 60 students, I think,
Wow.
per week. Most of them half hours, but still it was a lot. So, I had to earn money to earn money for life.
Absolutely.
But so I was doing, the schedule was very, very tight and a lot of running around, driving in the car and getting things scheduled. But, I was younger in those days. And so it was the thing you had, if you were freelancing, you always said yes to everything and do as much as you can. And I don't think I had 60 students for too long of a period of time, maybe for a year and a half or something, and then cut back a little bit. It was a busy time, but it was good for me, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The one story, I already know it, but I think it's great to tell. You said this about as a lesson on being prepared. And I'd love for you to talk about that story where you got called to play with Cleveland at last second. I think it was Mahler 5. You had been practicing full trumpet parts.
My idea was to work on at least the principal trumpet parts for all this. But Darling, who was fourth trumpet in the orchestra, had given me a copy of the fourth part in the Mahler 5. I think, I'd gotten a copy of the first part from him. And then he said, I've got the fourth part too, because that's what I play here. So he copied that. And he says, you should learn this too, So I was working on the part during that break, Christmas break. And I think I was playing it over and over and getting tired. And I remembered I had the fourth trumpet part. And I was just about ready to stop playing for the night. And I thought, maybe I should look at that fourth part. Jim told me I should do it. So I put it up and it's in the transpositions and I learned it. And then, what happened was a month or so later, Dave Zauder had a medical emergency. He had to have a big operation and he was out for 5 weeks and I got called to sub. And so there were concerts in Cleveland, did Bruckner 7 and some other repertoire too. And then there was a tour, which I went on with the orchestra, and the Bruckner was on that tour, and Mahler 5 was on the tour for just one performance at Carnegie Hall. But and there was a tour rehearsal before the tour took off. But since the orchestra had already done Mahler 5 at the beginning of January, they weren't going to rehearse it much. And I think Doc Nunny spent maybe 10 or 15 minutes on it, and he didn't do too much with the brass. Well, after that rehearsal, Al Couch, who's the third trumpet player, took me down to the Rheinberger Chamber Hall there at Severance. And he worked with me for at least an hour, maybe an hour and a half. And we just kept playing our, third and fourth play together a lot. And that helped me so much. I'm always grateful for him for doing that, because I was going to have, no other chance to play it before the Carnegie Hall.
So through all these performances, chamber groups, what sticks out to you as one of the most memorable performances that you've had?
Yeah, well, that Mahler performance was something, of course. And there was another time when playing with Cleveland, we were doing Alpine Symphony. I don't know if I told you about this before, but I was hired to play the offstage parts, one of the offstage parts. And before the first rehearsal, all of us offstage players were standing in the backstage area. We weren't sure whether we were going to be backstage or whether we were going to be in the balcony or whatever. So we're kind of waiting to find out about that. We were talking about the fact that, we're probably going to be off stage. We won't be seen. Maybe we don't have to wear tails and all this. And just right about that time, it was about 5 minutes to 10 before the rehearsal, and Adelstein walked in, and he walked past us and said hello. And he walked up to me and said, Jack, when you're done with your part, come on, sit on stage with me. So now, I know I'm going to be playing assistant, with the 5 minutes before the first rehearsal. But it was, I think we did Thursday, Friday, Saturday night, and Sunday afternoon performances, and then Monday recording session. That was with Ashkenazi conducting. Yeah, so that was a memorable and exciting experience too. And then one other time, I guess, that's memorable is as a student, we did The Pines of Rome at BW with Altman conducting it, Chuck was playing principal, Chuck Bergens, and then Kevin Good was playing second, and Dave Dewar was playing third. And Bob Early and I were up in the balcony doing the offstage parts. And Altman wanted the solo, the second movement solo, to be played from the balcony. And instead of Chuck going all the way up playing, Altman wanted me to play it. That was a kind of a confidence builder too, doing that performance. And yeah, so that would have been the spring of '75. So that was after I'd played it with Cleveland. A couple more times, I did the Pines of Rome with Cleveland. And when Adelstein retired, the final piece he played with the orchestra was at the end of the summer at Blossom, and it was Pines of Rome, and I played off stage with that too. And so that was kind of a neat thing to do, kind of come full circle with that piece, playing with Adelstein. With Adelstein retiring, and then Mike Sachs came in that fall of '88. That was 1988. And I remember going to that first week of performances. They did Bruckner 9, and I couldn't make it to the Thursday night, the opening night, but I think I went Friday night. And it was the first time I'd heard Sachs play, and it was so amazingly good. I mean, it sounded like he'd been playing with the orchestra forever, and I played extra with the orchestra from that point for a long time too. So it was a real treat to play with him and to learn from him. And I might mention too, this is something somebody asks me, or somebody has asked me about, playing pedal tones and doing the stamp method, which is what Sachs studied. And so before he came to town, I don't think anybody in the Cleveland area, did use the stamp method or played pedal tones. But as soon as Mike came in, in rehearsals, you'd hear him at the break of the rehearsal, he'd play some pedal notes to warm down. Of course, after the rehearsal, he would do that too. And pretty soon, a lot of the horn players started doing it. And of course, other trumpet players in the area. My perception of it is that he kind of started the trend of doing stamp and doing pedals and playing with mouthpiece buzzing. And so anyway, so that was kind of like a real shift, and obviously a positive shift for all of us around here to be doing that.
Could you talk a little bit about maybe some low points or things in your playing or just in your overall career that you had to overcome?
Yeah. One time I was in a car accident, and we were playing Cleveland Ballet run, and I was getting ready for a quintet recital with the Paragon Quintet at Akron U. And I was in a car accident, and the airbag opened up and hit me in the face. But good thing, because otherwise my head may have hit the windshield or the steering wheel. So, but the airbag kind of burned a little quadrant here on my face and didn't break a tooth, which was good. But my lower lip puffed up, quite severely, and so I couldn't play for maybe 2 or 3 weeks. And so it was interesting because I had a ballet performance that night at Carmina Burana, I think we were doing, and this was like 6 o'clock at night, and I was coming home probably after conducting brass choir at VW, and driving through Shaker Square, and they have the rapid trains, and it was on Halloween, and some guy driving, first of all, he had a Halloween mask on, so he probably had no peripheral vision. And I had the green light, and I'm going through just 25 or 30 miles an hour, and he came right through, across the tracks. There was a train stopped. Maybe he thought he's got to get on the other side of the tracks because the train's going to come, but he had a red light. Anyway, point is, I'm lucky it wasn't any worse. So I couldn't play for a while. And so Dave Zauder had just retired from Cleveland Orchestra, so he was free. So our personnel manager, Ginny Steiger, called him up and he subbed for me. And it's, ironic because I had subbed for him when he had surgery, 20 or not 20 years early, maybe 10 or 15 years earlier.
You were freelancing a ton, playing all sorts of genres, all sorts of different gigs. What did you have to figure out on the job? Your schedule was really busy, and we've talked a little bit about that, before, but what things did you really figure out on the job that you didn't know in school? Yeah,
I think sort of what we talked about a little bit earlier, learning how much to play, how much to practice, and how much to rest, and then to have the confidence to realize that if you get a chunk of rest, and for me it seems to like a minimum of maybe 3 or 4 hours rest, I can come back and play again and play as well or better than I played 4 hours earlier. And I sort of discovered that in the Cleveland Ballet doing the Nutcracker. We were in December. We did 20 years of Nutcracker for the entire month of December, and so we'd have double shows. And then later in the season, we did the same thing with Swan Lake, and not for a month, but maybe for 2 weeks, and also Romeo and Juliet. But anyway, so I discovered with the Nutcracker, I'd always feel stronger in the evening than I did in the afternoon show. And I think, and then that sort of clicked in my mind. I recalled that Cleveland Orchestra performance when they did Bartok and Heldenleben, the same kind of thing. So putting 2 and 2 together made me realize that maybe the first performance of the day sort of sets you up and warms you up for the second one, as long as you have enough time in between. If it's just an hour or 2 in between, maybe that's not enough time. So you learn how your body reacts to that kind of thing. You learn how your body reacts to the amount of playing you're doing plus or versus the amount of rest that you're getting. And then you can deal with that and work with that as best you can in all the jobs that you do and with all the practicing that you do. I remember Zauder. I learned so much. I never formally studied with Zauder, but I learned so much from him, just from playing with him, listening to him play with band, because he played principal in the Blossom Band for so many years, and then also with the orchestra. And he was personnel manager at Cleveland, so he would practice, warm up really early. And as personnel manager, he had to do that because I'm sure once 8 a.m. came, he would get phone calls from people, I can't make it today, can you get a sub or there's some problem. Personnel managers have to do so many different things outside of playing their instrument. But so he told me he would always do an early warm-up every single morning.
So then in 93, you start teaching at BW.
Right, yeah. Mary Squire retired, and she and her husband both retired and moved out of town. And so there was an opening now in the Ballet and Opera and OCO, and then also an opening at BW. And I auditioned for the principal job for OCO, but didn't get it. Mike Chun won. And then, so he and I played together for years after that. And he was a great choice for it. Yeah. And then we also played together in the Kent Brass Quintet for a number of years. But when it came time to find a new teacher for BW, I was offered the job. I was really, really thrilled to teach at the college that I, loved and had learned so much from, to be back at the school and to work with Jim too. That was just a cool thing to be able to do.
Yeah, because how long then did you guys teach together? How long did he stay on?
Well, he stayed on until, I think, 10 or 12 years. I think he retired from the orchestra, maybe 2005 or 2006. Yeah, because I think Mike Miller started in 2006. He didn't retire from both at the same time. And then Jack Suddy came in to teach in Jim's place. So I worked, I guess, 10 years or so, 10 or 12 years with Darling at BW. Yeah, that was very rewarding to be able to do that too. And we shared the studio as well, sort of like he had been doing with Mary, like 2/3 and 1/3 of the teaching. And we'd trade students from time to time. And then I also started doing the brass choir. I think that was 2 years later in 95.
I have a lot of fond memories of brass choir, a lot of repertoire that I never would have seen had it not been for that. And
yeah, that was fun to be able to work with some repertoire and some really good students like you. And I always had good players, and so that was rewarding.
It was fun. Yeah, I remember a lot of Gabrielli, some music that I probably haven't played since, actually, in that group.
Maybe you never will again.
Yeah, I mean,
brass choirs are a little more rare. Yeah.
Right. Well, it was just such a special part of the whole experience there. I mean, I had lessons, of course, between you and Suddy, and then quintet coachings and orchestra and wind ensemble. But then the brass choir was like that extra special piece of, just strictly brass playing.
Oh, that's nice. That's nice.
It was a lot of fun.
Feel that way, yeah. The quintet coaching too, I enjoyed doing as well. We always did a lot of that.
Yeah, I always loved those sessions. And then, of course, playing at BW's Bach Festival up in the tower when we were able to was a lot of fun.
Yeah, that was great.
A lot of great memories.
Another plus that at BW was we played in quintets. So that prepared me for playing in quintet professionally, obviously. But we had a really, really top-notch quintet my senior year at BW, and Jim Darling was the coach. And so that kind of prepared me for the Metropolitan Quintet audition. You know, we did Malcolm Arnold, we did a lot of the standard things with the student group. So by the, you know, when I came to audition, I already had experience playing those pieces. So I think that helped me fit in.
Sure, and you did a lot of quintet playing. I mean, you played with Metropolitan, Paragon,
and then Kent group, right? Yeah. So, but that it all started there with Darling coaching us as students. Yeah, and Kevin Good and I were in the quintet together, and so it was a good group, really good group.
So going back to the teaching, a couple things. What would you say? Not even necessarily just with students, but biggest mistakes that you see with students and professional players. You know. What do you think?
Yeah, rhythm. You know, rhythm is so critical, and pitch, of course, and sound quality. But what I found in private teaching over the years was that in more recent years, the younger students were, say, the ones auditioning for college, were really coming in. A lot of them were lacking, you know, the rhythmic comprehension.
So in professional auditions that you've listened to, what would you say the biggest mistake is there? What's the thing that's going to get someone cut right away?
Yeah, well, again, rhythm and intonation. I think those two things. And you know, if the rhythm is good and the intonation is good, then of course the sound has to be good. I mean, and you know, a lot of people will say the sound is the most important thing, and maybe that is true. But what seems to stand out to me even more than the sound when I'm listening to an audition is that those rhythmic capabilities and the intonation capability.
How long have you been teaching? How long did you teach for?
I started teaching, I think, in the fall of 1972.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you stopped teaching
and I stopped in 2020.
Okay.
Yeah.
So basically almost 50 years.
Yeah.
So you've been teaching trumpet students for almost 50 years. What would be the biggest piece of advice you would give to younger players?
Yeah. Practice, you know. And, you know, there's so many things you have to practice. But, yeah, I think to learn to, that if you're, you know, going to be serious about playing an instrument, then you have to be serious about playing the instrument. And that's the best advice I think I can give. And you know, there's all the components of, you know, like I was mentioning, pitch and rhythm and sound. But making a commitment to learning to play the instrument and learning to play it well. And if you have, you know, you have set some goals, and then you have to be committed to those goals. And, you know, you can play an instrument just as a hobby, and there's nothing wrong with that too. But I mean, if you want to make it a career, if you want to play it well, you have to work so hard, and you have to be consistent with it, and you have to stick with it. Yeah, I don't know if that was drilled into me when I was younger, but for me, I just liked it. It was just fun. And so I think that's what keeps me going, and that's what keeps me practicing and playing, because I enjoy it. I look forward to doing it. And, you know, almost, it's almost a feeling of, you know, whether I play professionally, earn money or not, doesn't matter. I just like to play.
Since coming back to Cleveland, I mean, I had you as a teacher at BW and a coach, but I think that's been one of the greatest lessons, is just sticking with it. You know, even though you might be dealing with some playing troubles, or this of course becomes harder once you're making a living doing it and you're having playing troubles, but sticking with it, you know, being confident that even though you might think you're approaching a rut in gigs, there's more gigs on the horizon, that kind of thing.
Exactly.
Just sticking with it has been the most important lesson I think I've gotten from you. And
good.
And figuring it out too. You know, sit down one day and you work on something and it doesn't work that day, but that's not necessarily an indicator of how things will be going a couple weeks from now.
That's true.
You just have to consistently stick with it. And that's been a really important lesson, because I can remember especially as a little bit younger student, hearing, you and Jack Suddy and other players do things that were totally out of my realm of playing at the time. And we have that notion of, oh man, how do they do that?
Right.
But I think there's, in being around you a lot and, playing with you a lot, it's just the price you pay. You pay this price and then all of a sudden you can play it. It's like, how do I learn to play Penny Lane? You play Penny Lane.
Right.
You eventually will figure it out. Your face will figure it out.
Yes,
And you'll,
exactly.
the notes will start squeaking
You're
out.
exactly right. Yeah, and it won't happen if you don't try.
Yeah.
And you can't be afraid to try. You can't decide, well, I'm never going to be able to play this, so why should I even try? I mean, if you take that attitude, then of course it won't work. But if you love doing something, if you have the desire to do something, you should do it. I mean, and it's like for young people, you have to find what that is in your life. If you like to read books, then read them and get some ideas of your own, and maybe someday you'll write them. If you like to tinker with little gadgets, then maybe someday you'll build them. So that's, I think, in some ways that's what life is all about. You find what your passion is. What you really like to do, and then you do that, and you keep doing that, and you run into roadblocks. But if it's still the thing that you want to do, then you keep going till you push through that roadblock, and you just keep going, and then maybe there's no end to it.
Yeah, and I think in getting to know you more as a friend, I've really watched and observed, how confidence in your playing really is established in the practice room. Or the consistency, especially like, a lot of younger players, I think they look at that just as I did. How do they do that? And it seems like this mirage of, oh, I'm not going to be able to do that.
Right.
But you just stick it out and you try.
Exactly.
And I think especially when I moved back here, I was a little more timid about certain aspects of my playing, but working with you a lot was so helpful in that none of those things were outside of what I was able to do or what were possible for me.
But you thought they were.
But I thought they were. And you had a really great and logical system of making those things better. Like your practice routine, for instance. I want to talk a little bit about that because I think it's really intelligently done. People love to use, the Ray Mace 10-week practice routine. I feel like yours is pretty similar. And if you're okay with it, I'd be happy to share it with other people.
Sure.
I'm sure they can find it helpful.
Maybe it'll help somebody.
But I think the way you logically break down a routine and how to establish one for yourself is really, really important. I know that a lot of people, when they use, the Ray Mace 10-week practice routine, I had talked to him about it before, and he mostly intended that for himself. And he intended that to be sort of a guideline for people to build their own routine with. And I feel like when I used yours especially, that's when a lot of things in my playing started to become less questions and more, I had less questions and I had more answers on how to figure that stuff out because of, so could you break that down a little bit?
Yeah, sure. I like Ray Mace did. I developed sort of a list of things. I call it organized practicing for my own playing, for my own benefit, so that I could not waste time, so I could be more efficient. I think the thought came to me one day. I remember sitting practicing and I had a stack of excerpts here and a stack of etude books and some quintet music, all over, and so many things. How am I going to get everything done? And I started thinking, well, there are the basic fundamental things that are similar in all those different styles of playing or categories of playing or whatever. And so I started writing things down on a sheet of paper. I think I still have the sheet. It's written like every square inch on the sheet, sideways and backwards is filled in. And then I had to get that organized, but synthesized it down to, I guess it's 11 or 12 different items. And the critical ones are the first maybe 7 or 8. Number 1 is plan. Number 2 is long tones. Number 3 is lip slurs. Number 4 is single tonguing. 5 is intervals. 6 is multiple tonguing. And 7 is scales and articulation patterns. So those are the basic physical fundamental things. that I, broke down. And there are more things, or things in those categories overlap, but those are the items that I think are really critical that we focus on every day.
I think the thing that's really intelligently crafted about it is that you never spend more than 3 to 5 minutes on one area in that first session. And that was what really
that's good.
propelled me to having a lot better, more efficient, and just more useful practice. I was getting more out of it, because rather than thinking, oh, I need to spend, my articulation is not very good, so I'm going to spend 20 minutes on that. That really got me nowhere. And I found as I almost cross-trained them, I would jump through all of these different things. Then I was really actually making more progress.
Good. Yeah, I think when I first made that list, now that you mentioned that, when I first started applying to my own practice, I was doing just what you were doing. I was thinking, okay, today's going to be a fingering articulation day, and tomorrow's going to be lip slur day, and the next day is going to be the single tonguing. And I'd spend 20 minutes, maybe more, just in that one item. And then I got to the point where I realized I'm going to spend maybe only 5 minutes at each of it's items 2 through 7. And I'm going to spend 5 minutes on each of those, which comes out to being 30 minutes. And that's going to be my warm-up. And I realized, I should just do those, because that can make almost, not the perfect warm-up, but that can make a really good warm-up. And not only will I be warmed up if I, work on each of those categories for, 5 minutes or less, not only will it be a good warm-up, but then I'm covering all those important fundamental things about playing, so that later in the day, I can just reach in my back pocket, so to speak, and, I've already done those this morning. One of the things that got me started on that, besides wanting to get my practicing more organized, because I had so much music I was trying to play, we had a Blossom Band concert, maybe on the 4th of July or something, back in the, I don't know when it was, probably in the early 80s or something, in mid 80s. And we did this one march, and it had triple tonguing, long triple tonguing passage. And I was sitting pretty high in the section, but all the players were nailing this triple tonguing thing, and I was kind of falling behind. And Leonard Smith was the conductor at the time, and he's doing his march thing, and it was a little fast for me. And I realized, I haven't done triple tonguing consistently for a long time. I haven't practiced it in a long time. Probably last time I practiced it was for an Esco Legend or something else, and then I don't do it for a while. And I said to myself, that's really not a good strategy. Having my warm-up consist of those items, and I cover my entire range with all those items. So, I start with the long tones, and I don't always start with the long tones, but if I'm doing the long tones, I might do it first, or I might do it third or fourth thing in that sequence. But whenever I'm doing them, I'll do, a couple of low notes, a couple of middle range notes, a couple of high notes. Next time I do it, I'll start with the high notes and then do middle. So I always try to mix up the order of the register of things.
One of the final questions I wanted to ask, desert island question. You can only have one trumpet method book. Which one would you choose?
Yeah, I thought about that from time to time, and probably the Arbenz book. Although I would maybe rip out some of the pages of the Arbenz book and stick in some of the Clark and the Schlossberg, and then take the Arbenz book.
Yep.
Okay, that's it.
That sounds
That's
good.
what I would do. Yeah. I think those three are really, I've had probably played out of those three books for the longest time, since I was, in high school. And when I have students, I make sure they're working out of those books at some point as early as possible.
Sure.
I think,
Yeah, I think that was sort of my bread and butter when I was in high school studying with Bob Dolwick. And then even when I went to BW, I think I had some impression that all of my books would be different, and they were the exact same. They were just different things that maybe I didn't get to with Bob.
Yeah, that's interesting.
But pretty much those three books were big. And of course, Shoebrook and all those other books came later. But I really remember, I think most of those books for me still have Bob's handwriting. We did, really those three were the big fundamentals rotation. So in your early days throughout your career, who would you say were your greatest playing influences?
Probably if I had to mention one, in the early days, I'd say Doc Severinsen. Listening to him play and watching the Tonight Show on TV. And I heard, other trumpet players on the radio. Well, Al Hurt, I remember hearing when I was young. and then probably Harry James, jazz band. And then when I was in junior high, Herb Alpert Tijuana Brass came out, and that was when I started playing a little more by ear, I think. We had, you could go up to the store and buy a record but you couldn't get the music easily. Eventually, I think they came out with arrangements. But if you wanted to play it, you had to learn it by ear, or at least that's how I did it. And I think that helped me develop my ear. Of course, learning about orchestral music, listening to Herseth, and probably heard about him in terms of orchestral playing. And then, of course, Adelstein here in Cleveland when I was younger, and then Maurice Andre, hearing him as a soloist, and learning about the piccolo trumpet. And yeah, with piccolo trumpet, I guess the first time I probably heard one was the Beatles' Penny Lane.
Well, Jack, it's been great to talk with you and talk about your career and all this stuff. It's been wonderful to have you as a mentor and as a friend and colleague. I feel
thank you.
really fortunate to have you in my life.
Well, I feel the same about you. It's great to hang out and to maybe give a little bit of my experience to you. Dole it out to you a little bit, and you have proved so much since I first met you. And no, you weren't this. But,